Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Mets Trade Connect. Our Tech Talk is talking about the green shipyard and almost the infrastructure element of the yacht market in terms of how we actually build and the places we build and supply chains. I'm joined today by three very, very well-known individuals: Bram Jongepier from Fedship, Rene Bremer from Akzo Nobel, and Robert Van Tol from the Water Revolution Foundation. All three have a very, very interesting synergistic perspective. So Bram, tell me the Fedship vision for the green shipyard. How's Fedship tackling this topic, and what do you think the future looks like in terms of the approach we should take?
I think that the whole industry and Fedship in that is starting to improve. Of course, we were in the lucky position a couple of years ago to start up a completely new yard, and that is something that we've made use of to make the best that we could at that time. Our new yard in Amsterdam has solar cells, has district heating, etc. A lot of systems in the yard have been especially designed to be as efficient as possible. At the same time, of course, there's a lot of yards that cannot be thrown down and started anew. So at the same time, you have to look into your processes and see where you can improve without building a new yard. And what we are doing is of course, working together with our suppliers to find ways to reduce waste in packaging, to try to get the best materials in for instance, certified wood, in getting the paint with the lowest VOCs, stuff like that. So it's a broad application. There is no quick win that does the trick. You have to pay attention to all the details, and there's a lot of information that you need to know what the best steps are. And that's the phase that we're in now, to get the best knowledge of materials, of processes, of suppliers, in order to make informed decisions.
Yeah. And what sort of energy sources are being sort of looked at these days in terms of the yacht market, in terms of the infrastructure side? Because obviously you've got several different options. You've got the use of solar, the use of wind, the use of other sort of renewables. We've even got things like, what do we do with rainwater from the actual sort of external sort of perspective? What's Fedship doing there?
I have to say I don't know actually. I can imagine that there is a filtration system, but I don't know if it was actually applied on our new yard.
Okay. So there's a lot of things that we still can do though as shipyards to sort of almost think smarter in terms of the application of that new thinking, that next generation thinking.
Definitely. It does rain sometimes in the Netherlands. And you have to try to make use of everything that's coming out from the sky, whether it be wind or solar or rain. You have to keep an open eye for all the sources that are available. And solar is an obvious one. It's easy to install. It's easy to use. Yeah. So it's easily integrated in the processes. So that's the first step.
And in terms of the workforce and their thought process or their culture, have you seen that change over the years in terms of their attitude to waste or their attitude to using materials?
Yes, we've for instance, I think it was already 10 years ago, we had an initiative in the yard to get attention to waste. And you could see an immediate drop in the use of things like buckets and gloves and all kinds of stuff. So as soon as you get it into the people's minds that you're paying attention, that it is important, people respond. Yeah,
no, I think this is the thing. They need an industry cultural shift almost, not just shipyards at a time, but the whole industry needs to apply this in terms of their thought process, their application. Also, that mindset is quite key. Rene, in terms of an organization the size of Akzo Nobel, this must have been a fairly major part of your future thinking. What are you doing in this sustainability and green topic at the moment? It must be.
Well, actually a lot, to be honest, on 4 stages. Well, you started with Bram on the facility as such, We started decades ago with big containers full of bacteria that break down the VOC, the solvents that came free into water and gases. We regenerate and reuse our solvents. The electricity on our Dutch facility is 100% on windmill energy. So facility-wise, we are, without saying, yes, we're on the forefront of sustainability. If you focus down to the wet stuff in the can, or maybe even later on dry stuff in the can, so think about powder coatings to the industry, we see less and less solvents. That start obviously in the 80s, obviously with the high solids. But now we run more and more into less solvent containing coatings, basically clear coats. So like Italian espresso concentrate of coatings, I always explain it. We see more and more biocide free underwater systems, and the intermediate step is less biocides. We might even see a difference split between commercial shipping and superyacht industry in terms of underwater. So biocide is really hot spot. So in the can, the wet stuff as such is very much subject to developments in terms of sustainability, but also the application. And I think that the process is more of a win for the industry than a pot of paint in all respect. If you see that paint is only 15 to 20% of the cost of the entire application, then you have to ask, what's that 15%? How can it positively influence the 85%? So in terms of electrostatic application, where you see much less overspray, a shorter application or drying time. So in the northern countries like we are in, less heating, but in the southern countries, less air conditioning time. And if you look over the fence to other industries, we see that a lot in automotive and aerospace, where the costs of air conditioning heating are extremely high. So how can the coating application process and the duration influence that? Also, the waste management and how to apply the right amount of product. So a 3D scanning prior to a spray application, for instance, with the fillers, you see a much more spot-on application. A 3D scanning up front, so more technical data is influencing the sustainability in a positive way. And if you scroll down the internet, you come down to a sort of 15% of our paint turns out in the waste bin. So how to reduce that 15% to close to zero? It's obviously zero would be the optimum goal, but we have to start somewhere. Yeah. So it is really the question of also for the yards and architects and also for us to sit together how to influence the positive. And as last, Martin, it's the logistics. If you see to automotive and aerospace, where you see just-in-time delivery, compared to our industry, you see pallets of paint first waiting in our logistic warehouse, then in the logistics of the yard, and then goes to the paint hanger or to the docking area. So how and where to improve just in time, how to change the ordering process from the applicator or the yard straight into our systems, so to supply just in time. That comes down to a different planning process. That's a very hot item and to discuss maybe in a later session, but planning is very much of influence of the sustainability of the process and the cost on a shipyard.
Yeah. No, I agree. Robert, from your perspective, what would you like to see happen in terms of your Water Revolution Foundation, but also we're launching the sustainability database, but other things can still be done. What's your perspective, Robert?
Thank you, Martin. I think we had two great examples here from FedShip and Akzo Nobel. What immediately stands out is Akzo Nobel is obviously a publicly listed company. So they have an obligation to report on sustainability, and they actually report very well. Yeah. We use it as an example in our educational course that we provide. There's the difference with a privately owned company. They don't have to report, but of course we do encourage that to start tracking your own performance, to start engaging with employees and even the local region to really, as Bram said, when you pay attention to those details, you really start seeing progress and more awareness of own operations. And I think there's a lot to win. We talk about green, building green yards. Green obviously only refers to the environmental challenges, which there's a lot to win. But we always also emphasize the social and economic impacts that are there on the local community where these shipyards are located. So obviously they are huge employers to local employees, but also local companies. As far as we know, and also we encourage to engage with local suppliers. So in that way to limit transportation. Obviously we are in a very international industry, so there is a lot of transportation. We also sometimes challenge the companies to think with the gate closed. So keep the gate closed, look at your waste flows. Where is it going? What materials are actually coming through your gate? And what are the percentages of waste that actually leave the facility again, and where does it go? Can you actually connect with another industry or local community where you can actually help them with in that way? So also ask your suppliers for smarter solutions and also offer them to your own clientele. So shipyards are of course, having an opportunity to improve their own operation without customer demand. That's also a difference between, let's say, if we talk about environmental friendly or yachts compared to an operation and build process. So there's a lot that can be done, also small steps. We talk a lot about, of course, energy and heating or cooling down in some areas, but also the water use is often underestimated. And we also, in our assessment of the build process, we look at the water scarcity index. So as mentioned before with the rainwater, that's actually an opportunity again to look at that. I know that at FedShip, they looked at, for instance, the toilet use of employees and suppliers on one day. Yeah. It's quite a lot. So if you can have that arranged with rainwater, you know, those kind of small steps get you into the flow of thinking about sustainability and environmental friendliness. Yeah.
Robert, is it sort of clear what the payoff is of all this investment in what I call the sustainability or the green topic? Because I think that's one of the issues that I would say the yacht market faces, is how much to invest and what the return on investment is.
That's a good question. Not in terms of nobody knows the answer, but it's a very legit topic for the industry, because it is a niche industry. Yeah. It's often referred to as, we're very much client driven. So we also depend on that a lot. But there's, let's say, corporate social responsibility that has a lot of influence on your stakeholders, not only employees. And with employees is actually a good example on how do you connect with that next generation of talent? Yes. Do they want to work for your company? Yeah. There are examples of, let's say, oil and gas industry. I won't name names of companies, but there are examples where they used to be #1 employer. Yes. To universities and practical students, but all of a sudden they lost in that way their image of a cool company. Yeah. Because they're part of the problem, not part of the solution. So that's one important stakeholder, obviously, to be future-proof, but also in terms of investment and support from local governments. You need to show that you're going to be part of the future in that way and take care of your responsibility within your domain.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Bram, from your perspective in terms of the next generation of employers, or employees rather, how important do you think this topic is to them? You've got quite a young, new group of people coming in. Are they easier to educate and get onto the course?
Yes, they're extremely motivated. What we see with people getting out of the schools or doing their final thesis with us is that they have a definite passion to improve sustainability. What I see, for instance, at this moment, we have 6 students from Delft University at the Voogt. And all of them have a sustainability association with their final topic. So there's fuel cells, there's alternative fuels, there's plug-in hybrid. There is all kinds of approaches into getting better yachts in this case. And you see the same thing in the yard process. We have currently, and in Aalsmeer, Lisette Kozijnsen, who is actually the first sustainability employee of the group, purely dedicated to the sustainability in the process of the yard. And that's definitely a thing that is growing. And I think you cannot ignore the next generation in that. They want this, they have to have it.
Yeah,
and if you can't offer it, they'll go somewhere else where they will be able to cover their need.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to the whole topic of how we are perceived by the wider world comes into this sort of language of what we are doing to produce not only cleaner yachts, but cleaner employment regimes, because obviously there is a succession plan to develop. There's a next generation to look after. And there's a whole era 10 years ahead of us where we need to find people that think yachting is a great place to work, not a dirty industry. Rene, what do Akzo Nobel do in this topic?
Well, actually, a lot, to be honest. And if you zoom out of the word sustainability, that's a containment word and has a lot of emotion in it. But you only can be sustainable if you know the real hardcore data behind it. So if you work more sustainable, it means you have to measure where you are and where you like to be and where you are on the journey to achieve your goals.
Yes.
And that opens another door. If you have the data, it comes down to quality. So a more sustainable industry, or at least an industry that is thinking about this topic, is really recording its own data and finding probably the gaps that you oversee in the process if you don't think about sustainability. So it's not only good for the environment, I think it's very good for the company process as such to focus on the sustainability. And at the end of the day, the owner is the winner. So not only the yard and all the suppliers around it, but the outcome of that complete mathematical process, which it is, with all small Lego stones actually, is the end user, is the owner of the yard and of the yacht, and that probably also runs down in the near future in maintenance. So can we come then to predictive maintenance or extended maintenance or more tailor-made? So also the costs after the yacht hits the water might be in a much better control if you dive into the word sustainability and all the data behind. Yeah.
Robert, what about data from your side? Measuring how, I'm saying to Robert, how about your measuring data and the sustainability topic? Tell me more about that.
Well, that was the very first deliverable from the Water Revolution Foundation, is the assessment tool, because without measuring, you can't start actually improving or identify where is the most effective way to improve. That both counts for yachts themselves, but also, of course, for the production process. So we also always take a life cycle assessment approach. You can't optimize for the operational side of the yacht without knowing what the impact is on the build or actually at the end of life or refit stage.
Yes.
So that's crucial. Assessing is also crucial for identifying what can be real solutions or alternatives. So currently we're launching the database of sustainable solutions. Of course, we're asking all the suppliers of sustainable solutions to come forward. But in order to justify for us to promote them, we need to verify them. We need to assess whether and to which degree it is indeed an improvement.
Yes.
We cannot only afford to let's say look at the marketing or the claims from the companies, at least as a foundation, but we want to help the industry by providing these verified solutions on a silver platter on one central place, that everybody should be aware of these solutions and at least can easily find them and identify them for whatever their operation is. If it's design, new build, operation, refit, but also the facilities themselves and even corporate offices. There's so many ways solutions and best practices to adopt.
Yeah, yeah. Bram, just jumping back to the supply chain topic. How important to Fedship is the sustainability credentials of us, and how much work do you go into to find people that meet your criteria? That must be a fairly major part of the future.
It is. It is. It basically it starts with purchasing. You have to get to know your supplier. You have to get insight in their green credentials, and like Robert said, you can't always believe the marketing of a certain company. You have to get a bit more in-depth assessment. And there's, for instance, certification of wood. Wood is one of the materials that has a reasonable certification scheme.
Yes.
There's FSC wood, etc. But in order to really believe that, you sometimes have to dig a bit deeper than the bit of paper that is stapled to a bit of wood. So, for instance, there's a lot of fuss about teak supply. Teak in Myanmar is slowly dying out. It's protected, but a lot of it is actually illegally harvested. And the trick is to find and take away that illegal bit of teak. And apparently that bit is quite large. It's maybe 3/4 or 80% of the total market, and that's worrying, is of course.
80% is illegal.
Sorry?
You're saying 80% is illegal?
Illegal, yes.
Wow.
That's what we're hearing, and that is why some of our suppliers are actually going into genetic testing of teak to find the source. So it can be quite an effort to be sure that you are getting sustainable materials. So that supply chain is really, really important.
Yeah.
To believe your certificate, that is what all of it is about.
Yeah. What about distance to shipyard in terms of that supply link and that shortest distance for delivery, etc.? Does that come into the whole remit as well?
Not yet. I think at the moment some materials can't be sourced from any other place but one single source. Then you have to use that one. I think it is important to look at the total. Like Robert says, you have to look at the life cycle of a certain material. Certainly up till the point where it enters the yard, and from that on, it is your responsibility to integrate it in your product in the best way possible. But if you look at the supply chain, one of the things we're looking at is companies that supply steel and aluminum with a certain certificate of their sustainable credentials, like companies using green energy to produce their material, like Akzo Nobel is. That is getting to be a market at this stage. It's not yet totally integrated. It lacks some certification again from, for instance, Lloyd's on the material characteristics, but it is certainly something that we're looking into. And it has to start with wanting to buy it. Well, that's starting up. And then you have to be able to buy it. And that's also starting up. The whole industry is getting there.
Yeah.
It's common, but it isn't yet.
Interesting. In terms of the topic of waste materials or waste product, as Rene was saying, how can we improve that area of our marketplace to reduce waste on the manufacturing side and even on the refit side? Because obviously what I'm interested in is, like, when you're refitting a boat in 5 years, 10 years or whatever, there's a life cycle element to those products and materials. What can we do better there, guys?
I think that's the maintenance and stuff like that is part of your life cycle. It has to be part of your total container of impact that you have when you build a boat. One of the things you can imagine is that, for instance, the anti-fouling coatings that we use, they have to be replaced every 2 to 5 years, depending on the system you choose. There's also anti-foulings that you have to replace every 10 to 15 years. And you have to weigh the consequences of that application against the total lifetime of the yard. So that is one approach. The other thing, waste, what you mentioned, it is very much in the again in the attention that you pay to the process. If you for instance, we buy our steel pre-cut. So if you don't pay any attention to the process of your supplier, then what is in it for him to reduce waste? He has to supply it as soon as possible, or just in time, or whatever. You have to make an incentive to reduce waste there. I think in our own process, the creation of waste is monitored. Yeah? So we know how much we throw away, and it is purely in your own advantage if you reduce that. It's an economic advantage. So there's no reason not to do it.
When you say throw away, that's an interesting subject as well, because as Robert was saying, there's opportunity there with a lot of companies to reuse that waste in other sort of local communities or local sectors or local industries. So is that something, Robert, that we think we can do better as a market? Because Rene is talking about 15% waste in the paint sector. There's so many other areas, like I look at teak decks and stuff. How much teak is not used because of its quality requirements? So what can we do, Robert?
Well, there are, of course, different scenarios and different things to look at. If you look at teak, it would already tremendously help to change a little bit the characteristics of teak, not the quality, but the characteristics. If you reduce from, I don't know, 4 meter planks to 2.5, for instance, optically, it's not really a difference, but it's a tremendous difference in terms of waste. Because otherwise you're really looking for a needle in a haystack. And once it arrives at the yard, there has already been so much selection. And in that way, also waste before it even reaches your premises. So you do have a responsibility for that stage before it reaches your company as well. Also, in terms of materials that do get to waste, if you use materials that are recyclable or upcyclable, then you can actually do something with it. If you use materials that only ends up as waste, it's the end of the cycle, and it needs to be, let's say, really destroyed or, let's say, getting rid of. So it's not an ingredient for another process or an impulse for another process. It also is an integration of the supply chain. If a designer, for instance, has a great idea, very exotic materials, but it takes a yard or an interior company 5 times to get it right, and it's very exotic material, then 5 times it got wasted, and not only for the sake of waste, but also for the sake of employee motivation. So there are different elements, and I think we can take a lot of responsibility, or let's say a view to our own part of this supply chain, and look at the next part of the chain and how our ideas, our choices, our proposals make what's the English word, to influence and affect the next chain, and as a matter of fact the whole life cycle of subsequently of the yacht, with maintenance, also at the refit stage. How do you take it out? Is it reusable, or does it really can only go to the container and be scrapped?
Rene, any final comments?
The final comment is, well, there are 2 types of waste. Is too much paint ordered, or indeed the waste in the bin. The too much paint ordered, call it the leftovers. They can be used on the next project, because yards have more yachts in-house than only one. It's not a one-off. So the reuse of those volumes is not a point. To apply the right volumes on the surface comes really down to measuring, 3D scanning. If you ask this question, Martin, in 5 years from now, we might have a complete different scenario in terms of applications, read robotic application, robotic sanding, measurements. So the automation in the industry goes very fast. If you see other industries next to us, it started obviously in the automotive industry. That's a standard process. Aerospace picks up at the moment. It is logic to think that first steps in yacht will be made soon as well. So this is also that technology is helping us all to reduce the waste to a natural minimum.
Yeah. Good stuff. Listen, we've run out of time. We had a 30-minute session. Guys, really interesting stuff and very, very valuable advice. I feel that a topic that can run in conversation for the next 5 years. Bram, thank you very much from FedShip. Robert, thank you for the Water Revolution. Rene, thanks from Akzo Nobel. And hope to see you next year at the Mets Trade Live in Amsterdam. And have a good time. Thank you very much, everyone.